Our universe is grand and vast, far as the eye can see. We are made of star stuff, stardust one might say. We are grand cosmic travelers across time and space. Yet, we've been inhabiting this planet, this spaceship called Earth, and all the challenges that we are facing as a species. I believe at the center, it is a crisis of imagination. And that to understand the future is to proclaim a new universalism that can connect all humans on Earth. I believe life is a precious thing, and far too long we have gone without thinking deeply about why the future has disappeared. Why our thoughts about what's to come has been something that is negative, something that is not abundant, that is not bountiful, but something that is depressing, horrific. I believe the future is something that we must think so deeply about. It is hidden inside of us. This is my journey in London and England, reflecting about our state of the world in our current society and why the future is something necessary for us to imagine and create.
I just got to LX right now after riding through the city of Los Angeles, and I think thinking about the UK, initially a lot of the certain vision that I had was very much something colonial, something historic. I was reading statistics about like how the UK has colonized like a quarter of the world, and I think there was rage and there was anger in me, I think, thinking about that. But I started to think even much deeper. Can there be a universal reach towards the human condition that could supersede my anger or my rage? And I know there's a lot of injustices, and I know there's a lot of conversation about the British Museum, which I've never been to. I've never been to the UK. So I think over the last couple of weeks, there's just been a very radical transformation from like rage, anger, frustration to sort of releasing that energy and being able to find a space of presence, being able to find a space that can allow me to be more curious about what I'm about to experience. Because so much of what we undergo in life has to do with our beliefs, and has to do with our values and how that seeps into our actions. So I think for me now, there is a sense of excitement. There is a sense of curiosity. There's also a sense of forgiveness too. I know that sounds very strange as a person of African descent saying this, but I do feel there's a deep value in forgiveness, and there's a lightness of being that has risen because of that. Because there's a lot going on the planet right now. We have climate issues, we have wars in the Middle East, we have a political election that's coming up specifically in the US. I think we are in a crisis of imagination, and for me these are sort of diaries to reflect upon and to remember this journey. taken by how old the city feels and the pavements and the structures and the rocks. But it almost feels very, when I first landed, I think one of the thought I thought was like, this feels exactly like the US. The old sort of structures and buildings, the rust. But when I landed specifically in the Easton station, it almost felt like a diversity. Like there's just so much diversity, like unexpected diversity that I didn't necessarily feel. And now I'm on my way to Lancaster University for the conference. And I really like this. The buildings are very old. It feels like each of the buildings look like mini castles, transported into a different world, a different way of life, it seems so outside of modern society, but people are still connected, people are still moving, people are still flowing. It's pretty fascinating now. We're taking the bus right now to Lancaster University, and it is pretty chilly out.
The next stop is
really excited to see what comes up. We just arrived in Lancaster University for the conference on around the future, titled Anticipation. Something very interesting happened. We saw an elderly couple, too, and I approached them and we started talking, and they were asking, okay, what are we doing here? Or do we work at the university? And I was like, we're going to a futurist conference. And I think their initial reaction was a sort of morose or a horror or even a nihilism around the future. And I asked them, like, is there hope in them? Is there any way that there is a positive view of what the future could be? And I think normally they started listing climate change, the Ukrainian war. They said they're from New Zealand and their son is going to this university. They're talking about Trump as well. I think my reflection around this is I feel like I would say 90% of the world, maybe at least of the West, doesn't necessarily believe in a hopeful or positive future. So I'm really intrigued to see how this conference is going to go, and how are people going to be hopeful? Are futurists inherently going to be more generous or more giving or more attentive to what the future holds? Because I do agree I think there is a lot of things that is plaguing our kind right now, but I also believe that there's a lot of things that to be hopeful for. And I think we have to build that future ourselves. And I think it's something that is deeply spiritual. It's something that is deeply collaborative. It's something that's deeply creative. And that's something that's very bilateral in terms of nations and organizations and sectors working together. Because it is very complex, it is very nuanced, but I just thought to share that. I think the first encounter of people in Lancaster was this sort of negative outlook towards the future. And I'm wondering, do you hold a certain perception like that? And I think a lot of people do. But I want to challenge, at least I'm intrigued to see how and what or the sessions at this conference in my time in the UK is going to look like in terms of what's happening on our planet today. So I'm just about to go to bed. This is the first day. Before I came here, I Googled. Actually, I did not Google. I used ChatGPT. I asked it what was the financial capital of the world. And initially it gave me New York City, but second it said London was the financial capital of the world. And it got me really thinking about like the complexity of how such a nation gets to reach this amount of wealth so rapidly. And as a country that's over 2,000 years old with so many histories, and whether you look at the legacy of colonialism or you look at the riches of kingdoms and conquests or the Roman Empire, it just seems that there's so much richness here. Yet, how does history seeps in across time and space to help us see more of the injustices, but also the opportunities that we as humans, in terms of our shared history. And I know there is a lot of conversation about whose history is told and why those histories are upheld. But I think English history have been placed on a pedestal. But I do feel there's a lot of valuable lessons to peer into the historical aspects of this nation, a nation at some point who had the largest and most powerful navy in the world. So I do feel like it is an older country than the United States, and I think I'm so intrigued to explore and show you, and to go along in this journey to kind of explore what does it mean to be human in the 21st century, and what can we learn and what can we see from this specific geography, this specific location. So yeah. It's cold, it's rainy, it's gloomy, it's 6 in the morning, and you still gotta get a workout in. I still want to. I think I get workouts early in the morning. It's because it helps me feel so much more alive. It makes me feel that I have a sort of a greater purpose, that I feel so much more aligned with my body, my mind can think, but ultimately I think it's for my mental health. I think as a human, we have so much on our minds. We've been endowed with the magic and power of thinking, of the imagination, of creativity, and working out this physical body to actually feel like the limits and how I can go about my day is so critical to it all. So I woke up early. I don't know if I woke up early, but I think in terms of the time shift, I woke up around 5. And yeah, I'm pretty dedicated. Going now to the sports center in Lancaster University, walking through a beautiful, beautiful street. And there's a lot of just nature everywhere. Moss, green grass, doves, crickets, birds. It's beautiful. But I had to get that workout in to start the day for this conference. I'm inside one of the castle. It's the Lancaster Castle. It used to be a prison and also a place where they would do trials of witches. It's very fascinating. It's very gritty, and it's extremely cold right now in terms of the weather. But it's very cool. We just had a little tea there, and the conference is gonna start in a couple of hours. So I'm really excited to meet others who are gonna think about what the future means for our planet, and what types of futurity are needed for us to be able to connect deeply with one another. At least that's how I see it. At least for me, when I think about the future, I see it as how do we connect with each other as people, as humans, and community. The future for me is very relational, because without that, what is the future? If we are moving now in a state, as the data says, we're increasingly becoming more lonely. I think it was Vivek, the US Surgeon General, who released a report last year saying the loneliness epidemic, over 58% of Americans or adult Americans feel lonely. And you see that in the UK, you see that in Australia, you see that in a lot of places around the West. And how relationships and social disconnections have decreased and social disconnections have also increased. Is that the future that we are entering? A future where we're no longer connected to each other. I think that is quite damaging in many ways, because I think we've disconnected ourselves in who we are and what we can be in so many layers. The future must be relational. It must. Where has our future gone? Where is it going? I'm walking outside of the Lancaster Castle, just kind of continuing some of the conversations about earlier. It's just, I don't know, feels like the tyranny of the past, of what's happened in the past, seems to grapple upon our ability to imagine something new, something beautiful, something possible. Where has it been? Where's the future gone? I'm reminded of a British philosopher, Mark Fisher. He talks about the future has been flattened and that we are trapped in the 18th, 19th century. And a lot of the ideas that we understand today are just rehashed in a very central way in our times, as if it's higher definition. But those are not new ideas. Those are old ideas distributed to us. But can we find those new ideas that can help us shape something new and better? I met two people from the conference on the bus after we left the castle, and it was quite invigorating in terms of the challenge that we have as people, especially in our world. We tend to specialize so much in our craft, and this craft brings a canon, and this canon brings blinders, and we try to innovate within our own systems. But the things that we learn through that knowledge eventually becomes an entrapment. How do we break free and imagine outside the boundaries of what we've learned? And I think a lot of it was, how do we become more childlike and access that form of rooted creative process, which I think is a challenge and enthusiasm and optimism that I felt from the conversation. Voila.
So my name is Daniel Kaplan, and maybe the one big idea I'm playing with about the future is that it's not so much about what you say about the future, but the ability for people to be saying things about the future, whatever they say. So I'm looking at the future as a capability rather than a place.
Okay.
That's what I'm toying with.
Super, thank you. I'll see. I want to get some initial reflections. We just had our plenary session where two individuals gave their response. And I thought it was interesting. I think a lot of it was talking about anticipation and how do we imagine futures. One was Olemefi, I think I'm probably butchering her name, this black British scholar, and she was talking about how do we bring people on the margins, activists, black, brown, queer, women, disabled, people from the margins to start to imagine movements and how that movement creation can create opportunities and new realities for people. I thought that was really fascinating. The other person was talking more about open futures and how futures are open-ended in the way that we can come together to sculpt them, these open futures. And there's like dialectic, dialogic. I think it's interesting. I think one thing that's also interesting is that this has about 300 people from all over Europe and the world. And I think I'm one of 3 black people in this conference. So I think this is going to be very interesting to see this Futurist conference and how a lot of it sort of context forms.
Hey, my name is Juan Fabuel. I'm an artist, researcher, and anthropologist. And yeah, the way it's been extremely beautiful to be here. And I think that one of the ideas for the future is that it's going to be a future, that it's going to be kind of dark in a positive way, that we are going to re-inhabit the shadows in a more hopeful and trustful way.
All right, thank you. This is day 2 of the conference, and I'm at it again. An early morning workout. Woke up at 5:30. I had a call from my dad. I think it was around midnight back in Florida when he called, so I just went ahead and read. I woke up and did my reading, my morning routine. Now I'm going to the gym, just get a good workout and get some breakfast and start the day. Today's the day where we're going to lead the workshop around the Collaborative World Building Collective. Really excited to get people to imagine what would be a future if they were radically empowered overnight, financially, politically, institutionally. I thought yesterday was quite powerful in terms of the first day. One of the sessions that I ended up going with was called Felling Futures, and it was led by 3 individuals, and the whole concept was around creating a structure around understanding disabilities. And one of the exercises that we did was to literally be quiet and try to sit in our chair and not think about anything, but also make sure that we're not moving. I think for me this was a powerful exercise because it showed me that being human, like there's so much that we can't control with our mind. There's so much that we can control with our willpower. And it was very much like a very post-humanist exercise, because I believe in post-humanism, and I do believe that if we decenter the human and our abilities to create systems and we really stand at the edge of the possible, I think just real quick, I realized that my heart was beating, that I had layers upon layers of systems inside of me that I couldn't control in terms of not moving. I think as well, noises and things from around the world, it really showed us that in terms of the conversation, one of the big things that they talked about is like, we as humans always want to accomplish things. We always want to yield a sort of certain result about how something is going to happen. All right, we want to quantify that result. We want to take control. What happens when we let go? What happens when we relinquish that agency? It was a little bit uncomfortable for me, but I felt it. I think the uncomfortability is because I would say that I'm a student of Nietzsche. I've learned a lot from the Nietzschean sort of vision. As a black immigrant in the U.S., I think emancipating my mind, my body, and my ways of life against systems of legacies of slavery, for example? How do I engage my willpower, my agency, to be able to claim my creativity, to be able to undo the harms of the past? But this exercise challenged that very notion that there is something beyond what we can claim. There is something beyond what we can control. And what happens when we build a language around letting go, around relinquishing agency, around allowing something new to emerge? I think it shifts your perception. And I think the future of systems that are designed for people who have abilities in terms of like the process of walking, the process of like sort of existing in the frameworks that this entire society is designed for able people. And disabled people have to live their lives in the realization that all these systems are not necessarily designed for them. It's like we design it in the concept of how we exist, and there's privilege to the ability. So the disability sort of futurist thinking, they talked about it in terms of crypting time, like subverting the ways of being that how our society has been formed. So I really think that this concept of like allowing things to emerge and just sort of relinquishing this agency that we're so addicted to, this control, I really feel like we can see more of the future. It was more of an exercise of how do we course correct. I think one major reflection that I had was that there is a need for a multi-pronged approach to how we engage the future on all systemic, cultural, societal level. But I think at the end of the day, there is also a place and time for this course correcting. Yeah, it was very fascinating. I mean, that was one element of the day yesterday, and it really captured my imagination. To be honest, it really captured my imagination. And for the rest of the night, we went to an Italian restaurant, and I think the conversations there were quite amazing as well. But yeah.
Hello, my name is Martin, and I think we need to crypt the futures, and I think we will be crypting the futures much more, which means actually relinquishing control of the future and what we think we want in the future, and maybe connecting to nature a little bit more, or not even to nature, to the universe and the vibration of the universe, and vibrate and dance with the universe.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Julia Pögele from Austria, and in my view the future will be much more entrepreneurial. We will empower especially also females and young entrepreneurs, ongoing entrepreneurs in a broad meaning, to co-create and shape the futures.
Right. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Niamh. I am based here at Lancaster University in the Division of Health Research, and I'm at the Anticipation Conference thinking about the future. And I think the one big idea just out of our recent session is what happens when we just don't put humans at the center of everything. What happens if we change our perspective and we put non-humans at the center of our problem solving, policy planning? Where does that get us in our thinking? So I'm excited for new narratives, new ways of thinking about that in the future.
Super, thank you.
You're welcome.
I wanted to get some initial impressions around the workshop we just did, the Regenerative World Building Collective. And it was an incredible world where the group imagined together a sort of forest future where nature had taken back its ability to kind of have an influence in our lives, because we oftentimes are so disconnected to the natural world. And this future was where certain technologies and ways of being were in tune with nature. like we had kind of gotten back this sensing around how we understand other people's emotions. It was also cool to see how people prioritize music and art. It was interesting as well to see how the different types of governance of like how corporations, for example, one of the key aspects of the world was there's a seat on the board in corporations for nature. It even went to the point where animals started to have implants that made them more sentient. I think the process of the collaborative world building, I think that is a futural aspect. It's communal. It is a place where interdisciplinary processes can come together to imagine a possible world. So I really believe in what we just did as a process that can help people just kind of share more of their wisdom and in creating a shared vision of what could be. I'm a little tired, but I'm excited. The conference continues tomorrow, and I'll be going back to London, hopefully, and I'll have a couple of days to explore, and I can't wait to also show you what that looks like and some of my impressions around the city of London, because this has been very much out of like the sort of the country, it seems like. So I can't wait to kind of get the city life and feel the energy of that flow. But yeah, we have one more day, and this was a great experience. Just wanted to touch base and start to reflect a little bit more here as well.
My name is Bristol Bond, and I am here at the Anticipation Conference in Lancaster, UK, and I think what I'm aware of is the radical diversity of possibilities of futures that can and will unfold. And for me personally, how can we take responsibility for the futures that we might be creating unconsciously just because it's what's familiar versus what we actually want? And that is a deeper spiritual question. And then how do we help all these amazing thinkers who storytelling may not be their contribution specifically, but how do we help that take what the deep research and deep thought that's gone into this futures work and actually translate it into ways that help us imagine and help us dream and see possibility where we might feel like there is none.
Super, thank you.
Hi, my name's Julian, and the big idea I have, and I've been provoked by this conference, is a Afrofuturism school and policy lab focused on African and Black futurity, and it's how it intersects with policy making and policy futures.
Super.
The Anticipation Conference ended with a lot of enthusiasm in me. I think it was a very pivotal point in my thinking of posthumanism as an idea, a framework, and a way of life that can help not only me, but that can help the world decenter the human so we can have more possibilities. Now I'm on my way to London, and I'm excited to uncover what this ancient city has to say about the current state of our planet.
I think sometimes life asks us to think about these deeper questions about why we're here, and specifically how the future is related to our own individual actions. And I think it's incredibly important to do so. The future has been on my mind a lot because I think a lot of people in my connections are very much pondering about what could happen next, and how do we take more control? How do we have more agency? How do we understand each other in the ways that allows nature to thrive? I think these are the big questions that I'm pondering about because of the conference. And I think that once we're able to really ask these questions and engage in these dialogues, the future becomes more clear. I think it is this sort of crisis that is very much true, but I think we have to confront it with all our being. We must. I would say that I do believe in a central, unifying, divine force that ties us together as the human species. And I also do believe that oftentimes a lot of this room right now in the British Museum is depicting a lot of the mythologies and expressions of different cultures, indigenous cultures from New Zealand, from Brazil, from Latin America and Peru, from Native Americans to Eastern European to even African. I think a lot of the processes around the future is that we need to bring back the old gods. We need mythologies to help us enter the crevices of the soul, because as we move more towards a future that's technologically prone, a future that embraces progress, a future that sanitizes who we are as people, a future that refuses to see healing as something essential, connection as something essential. I think the future that I desire is a future where humanity has reconnected with these old myths, or have created new myths that envelops them like a womb, that allows them to have the tools and the processes to heal themselves, to cope with the madness and the tyranny of the destruction that we're doing right now on the planet. So this room right now in the British Museum really extols a lot of the sacredness that ancient people and their ancient gods used to fully embrace. And right now, I think, especially in the West, we're highly disconnected. We wake up, we pick up our cell phones, we listen to the news, we text another person. Though these technologies are very fascinating and expanding, but what does it do to what's inside of us? I think a big part for me of the future is to embrace the mysteries that is all around us, the mysteries we've forgotten, because it's going to be very important that as individuals, as communities, we tap into a myth that allows us to see more, so we don't repeat the same mistakes of the past. So these mythologies can carry us in a bigger place, something holistic, something much more connected to everything that was and everything that will be. I think a thought that I have right now is reading, for example, here it says that the first people in North America, there was about 2-3 millions of people of native descent living in Canada and the US. And when the first European contact decimated, falling to about 300,000, I think this is just but one example of the legacy of colonialism. And I wonder what would the world look like if we had modern ways of being through the process and frameworks of these indigenous groups. What would the world look like if native, indigenous, black and brown visions of the earth in the past and the future were centered in how we design our technologies, how we understand communities, how we evolve as a species into space? I always wonder, what would the future look like if those processes were centered in an alternate world? I wanted to share some thoughts a little bit here. This very room that you see in the back is the room that explores the British colonial empire. And a lot of the items here have been taken from all over the world. I've seen things from Egypt. I've seen things from Africa, all over Africa. I've seen things from all over Asia, Peru. I've also seen things from North America. and I don't think that they had permission to take any of this. I think there's a lot of these are vestiges of war. It seems that the past lives on in this room, yet I think the question that I'm thinking now in terms of the future is, how do we operate? How do we operate in a way where we embrace different types of cultures, yet we seek to learn from the past, but not take on the madness and the horrors and the pain and the suffering of that was caused by this sort of imperial conquest. So I think if we're thinking about as a civilization to go to Mars and seek to build new societies, if we seek to create more sustainable measures to engage in climate change, I think the challenge here is that a lot of what brought this sort of tyrannical process is a unifying vision. It's a vision that really sought out to flatten everything that is beautiful and different and unique, that didn't succumb to this sort of rationalism that we're so obsessed with in the West. I think things, as Toni Morrison says, needs to be unreasonable, needs to be irrational. It needs to have something that doesn't ascribe to how we're taught to embrace logic and thinking and this sort of scientific method that erases so much of the cacophony of what it means to be human. I think I don't have anger. I don't think I have sadness and sorrows. I think I see the perspective of many people saying that certain of these items could also serve as a way to educate everyone else around the world about different cultures and different types of peoples. Because I think I've heard that argument too. We should not return these things because they could essentially serve as a space where millions of people around the world every year visit this space. What better way it is to educate others about cultures that we've never seen. I think the past and history is a very tricky thing, and it's a very messy affair. Do we hold on to the past to the point that we don't allow ourselves to move on and heal and forgive? But how do we rectify also the harms that's been done of the past? Because until those things are confronted, I think our future is dimly assured for self-destruction. I think we have to bring those different parts together. We have to unveil the shadows in such a way that allows us to see new light, see new things, embrace new beginnings in ways that we've never thought previously possible, especially in the West. I'm here in the middle of the Assyrian civilization. A lot of old structures, very, very old structures from the 600 BC, 700 BC, of people who lived just like you and I, who had dreams, who had thoughts, who had actions, who had lovers, who had to learn things, be challenged and be transformed by different ways of being in life, traditions. Yet their life just became so fleeting in the direction of history, just swiping and sweeping everything. I often wonder, what about us? When we live in the present time, what of the future societies would tell that we did? Would we have failed our generation with the massive oil consumption, with the climate change issues, with the political tyranny that our leaders are not listening to us? What will the future humans in the deep future look at us in the present moment? This is some of the things that is being, I'm thinking right now is, I think the future is watching us. We can learn so much from the past, but we're not. Yeah, I really think this idea that future civilizations are looking at us, they are learning from us, from our mistakes, from our lack of vision. And I think when I look deeply into history, which I think the British Museum has allowed me to do, I reflect upon my life and what I stand for, what my values are, why do I dedicate my life to sort of creating a level of change around stories, around science fiction, around collaborative world building, around painting. I think this sort of deconstructs my ego and allows me to find a little bit of freedom. That in the end, that we're all going to be swept by history, that our memories of who we were and what we do will also be swept. But how can we find an opportunity there to find more mutual understanding, more love, more purpose and more meaning to pursue what we want to do despite the limitations that we have? I think as much as we don't like to prioritize or maybe center Western and Greek imaginary, I love the fact that a lot of the Greeks really imbued the ideas of gods and myths in their day-to-day. And I think that's almost the role of mythology. It gives us permission to tap into a magic that we are as humans. And I feel like when we're so constrained by what's possible and what's not possible, by this sort of technicality of being, I think we lose a part of ourselves as humans. We become more mad. So I love when I'm seeing sculptures of humans battling with centaurs or gods represented, engaging humans. I think the belief that these gods were very real and integrated in their day-to-day, I think is something that in modern societies we have lost. What can we remember from the past? What should we remember from the past to help us create the future that we desire? All right, I just bought this book at the British Museum. It's called A History of the Word Utopia. I think I would consider myself a utopian because it seems that people have stopped believing that we can create the perfect society. I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we fundamentally have been convinced that a perfect society cannot be created, cannot be constructed, I think it'll never be possible. And for me, I understand the comments around utopia as being something that is a little bit like unimaginable or perhaps unachievable because humans were imperfect. We need to embrace the messy. And I think the way that I see this is that perfection is not something that is clean. It's not something that's universal. I think for me, when I think of a utopia, I think of it as how do we look at radical imagination in terms of embracing even the edges and the parts that are complex, that are emergent. I think we have a very dominant view of what utopia is, and this type of utopia is very Western, it's very white. I think white utopianism seeks to erase everything, flatten, as I mentioned before. But I think for me, my utopia is how do we create systems that are adaptive, that are emergent, that allow us to reflect, and most importantly, that goes deep within the inner life and fosters this emergent force at the edges where society lives. Society lives in the inner life. If we don't have a society or a system or a way of living that doesn't tap into those sort of innermost processes, then what is the point of living? Are we to become robots? Are we to become zombies? I remember, I think it was Harriet Tubman that said that she could have saved many more slaves when she was going through the sort of freedom trails. Maybe that statement has been debunked, but I just still like it. They say Harriet Tubman was like, I could have freed more slaves only if they knew that they were slaves. I think we have to challenge ourselves to believe that the world can be better, because it's in that image, in that vision, in that radically imagining that we can fail forward in the attempt to reach that thing. I know the Futurist conference challenged a lot of those notions of the ideal state, that we need to wrestle with reaching a status, because that status can compromise the possibility in the emergent forces. But can a utopia be that emergent force? Be that chaotic reordering, deep love that embraces all parts? That's my challenge, and that's what I want to be thinking about, because I think we do ourselves a disservice when we don't imagine the most profound possible world. Oh, there you go. I think, as in all museums, the British Museum has very been invigorating, really exploring different parts of the world, different ideas, different frameworks. I think my big reflection really is, I think we do have something to learn from the past. The past is something that we have to hold on very dearly. I think my biggest reflection is really has to do with our ability as humans to dream up possible worlds. And a quirky idea that I'm thinking of is the Museum of the Future. In the year 3000 or the year 4000, or even in the year 2050 or 2060, how are museums going to look differently? What our future society is going to say of our times right now? Will we even have a society? Will a nuclear war plague our world? Will we even have time? I think for me, again, a big reflection, something that is really has been a drumming beat, especially visiting the African bronze, has to do with this need to live fully, this need to follow one's bliss, this need to take a posture of life and claim what is yours for the taking. I think oftentimes we deny ourselves our potential, we deny ourselves the mysteries that are accessible once we take a leap of faith towards what is burning in us. Because at the end of the day, we're going to be swept away by history. At the end of the day, what matters is the relationships. Again, I'm going to say that the future is relational. Building those bonds, building those frameworks, so we as a society, as a people, can collectively see what does this human species look like. I think there's a need for planetary humanism, something that acknowledges the shared connections that we have, but doesn't seek to erase, doesn't seek to separate, doesn't seek to create boundaries around what we can be. I think we're more alike than each other, but our likeness is through our differences. It's our differences that makes us alike, if we can believe it. It's our differences that makes us alike. I just took a sort of a tour of the river separating the two lands of London and Westminster and the other side. I think a lot of what's percolating in my mind is really that European culture and European ideas, is it in decline? I think so many people believe or think about these things as entities that are in decline, but I don't know if it's in decline. It is not in decline. And I think it's shocking to say that, because I think it's the decline is perceived in the context of capitalism and what capitalism can bring and the type of innovation that capitalism can bring. But the unfortunate downside of a culture that's not in decline within the context of capitalism means that the natural world, the non-Western cultures, the ideas that perhaps could have flourished don't have a space to exist. There isn't an alternative. So I think I'm understanding now that the rich culture of European thought, from the Enlightenment, from existentialism, from a lot of the philosophical and cultural traditions, I think are very much integral to being human. But the challenge is that when it's pervasive and married to and fueling capitalism, which is essentially very a Western thought and framework, I think in this zero-sum game mindset, we will ultimately lead to our own destruction. So I believe that, yes, it is not in decline in the context of capitalism, but in the context of, if we do care for our planet, if we do care about the future generations, it is imperative morally that we imagine new ways of being and new ways of doing things that are not central to European ideals. We imagine alternate worlds, alternate values, alternate ways of being that can help us confront the mutiny that has been given to us. It's almost as if we have a ship that is fully stocked with goods, and we know that there are deep scars in terms of who's on the ship and where does everyone get to sit. Some sit in the luxury space, others sits in the guts of the basement, others are the cleaners. But eventually this ship is headed for an iceberg. I think it requires us to realize that even though the semblance and the realities that I've been experiencing here, it seems that everything is so joyous, everything is so calm, everything is so beautiful and clean and crisp, and it's running so smoothly. Yet I wonder, at what cost? At what cost does the life of this rich city gives and connects to a shanty town in Brazil, a shanty town in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, a shanty town in the Congo? I must and want to make that connection, because we are living now in a global society, and the society needs to make those connections. And I think living in an interconnected world means that we can eventually begin to see that the actions that we have individually and how we integrate ourselves in the system has a cause and effect and a consequence to societies around the world. I choose to believe, because of London exists, because of New York exists in the way that it exists, and its resources and its economy, it is directly connected to the abject poverty around the world. Yes, I can already hear people say that we are living in the best times in our right now. We have risen out of, majority of populations across the world have risen out of poverty. The majority of people are living healthily. We're more developed. There's less wars, global wars. Yet there is a psychic scar. There is a loneliness epidemic. There is a an affair where 70% of species on the planet have been destroyed in the last century. What does that mean? I think we need to stop and rethink this Western project and build out of its entrails an imagined reality that can work for everyone and that can welcome other cultures. Right now, as I walk on the streets of London, this does not look like a society in decline. It doesn't look like the West is in decline. But I think there is a hyper-reality, as Jean Baudrillard types to say. There is an extractiveness where we live in a fantasy. Because the poverty, the trauma, the darkness, the depression, and the ruins of colonialism, all of these things still exist, yet we don't see them. Where is the future? Yesterday, while I was walking back to the location of my hotel, I saw a young kid. I think it was two friends, and they were riding a bicycle, and one of them said, "Hey, look what I can do," and kind of gaining the attention of the other kid. And I think in that very moment, I saw a very transcendent force. I was brought back to my childhood. I was brought back to a lot of the youth that is so spread around the world in terms of friendship and curiosity and the need for connection. I think so far this experience in London is really hinting at all the different identities that I have. And I think one that is rising very forcefully like a meteor is the universal one. There is a universal experience to being human. And I think oftentimes that universal experience, the way it's been rooted and been defined, has been from very colonizing visions. But what does a decolonized universalism look like when we can embrace all humans? Because at the end of the day, we want to be loved, we want to be cared for. We want to find community. We want to engage with people who understand us, find our tribe. I think a lot of the times these types of processes are lost. So I think this universalism is something I'm wanting to understand more in the context of the future and why it's necessary for us today. This might be a bit of a controversial bit. In the United States, I've been in activist circles, black circles, progressive circles, even academic circles that would even proclaim that the white culture doesn't exist. I think throughout my time in London, white culture does exist. There is a lot of cultural, artistic creation that have been predominantly created from European ethos and ideals. And I think the challenge in the process is that a lot of these cultural productions have the backing of institutions, have the backing of colonial legacies, have the backing of financial structures to be able to centralize a world or an undertaking that renders anything outside of those frameworks invisible. So I think white culture does exist. I think it can and must be understood. But at the end of the day, for me, it's about repairing the harms of the past so we can see the future, which is an idea that this reparation, not in the context of financial, it's an honoring of others' cultures and perspectives, not in such a way that you just create a seat at the table. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a fundamental reimagining of what would it look like if this culture was fully manifested and embraced within the context of those backings, which I think connects back to the conference again, the anticipation conference and the workshop that I co-led. I think a lot of what's happening today is there is this cannibalization between our relationship, between our communities, between who we are as people. And I think it behooves us, if we don't take the time to really understand and to really comprehend what sort of the value can we find and discover in experiences and ideas and cultures and perspectives that are extremely foreign to us, extremely alien to us. I think we need to have this undertaking. We desperately need to have this undertaking, because this undertaking requires a leap towards the unknown and being comfortable with the discomfort. I think that's where the future lies. The future lies in our ability to transcend our own sort of adoption of these concepts that have been centralized as the underlying force of reality. The neo-colonial project, the neoliberal project. I think one has to perceive the shortcomings of these things. I think white culture does exist, and I don't necessarily believe the West is in decline either. But if we want to continue with this hyper growth that defines so much of the West and its culture, we are destined for a damnation, a complete destruction of the environment, of species, of languages and cultures and histories that are continually being erased. Not in a way that we're documenting them as the museums, but in a way that they are practiced and upheld and seen in wondrous facets. I just came from the Tate Modern Museum, and I think a lot of what I saw was a special exhibition by Kandinsky, who was a Russian artist who explored a lot of the spiritual properties of art. And I truly believe that the future, when we really think about it, is encoded in art. There is a meaning where it kind of connects the past, present, and future. So I do feel all types of art across medium carry the messages of society. I think art can be the vessel where the future explodes from. I also feel the future is within indigenous cultures and folk cultures that are endlessly being erased by modernity. And I think if we can understand the remnants of the past and what they hold so dearly through their practices and their beliefs and their histories, hidden and not prioritized, I think a future of holism, a future that is more holistic, will emerge from those practices. I also do believe the future also, thirdly, exists in the most profound spaces of the inner life. If we can travel to the geography of what makes us human inside of us, our values, our characters, explore them deeply, and find these emergent spaces and corners inside us as human beings, I think the future erupts there too. I think these three facets of future as art, future as folk and indigenous visions, future as the inner experience and inner life, I think provides a very unique vision for how modern society can start to reconcile with what it's lost and the degradation of so much that we know is possible, so much that we know and we don't believe anymore. I think the future is also about dreaming, allowing our hearts and our minds to be able to dream fully in ways that we never thought possible before. I believe that the documentation of historical events is so important for us to contemplate life and what it means to be human. I think the future cannot exist without a proper history, a proper knowing of where one comes from. I am particularly shocked and amazed by the documentation that England as a country, London as a city, is able to do based on a place and time where there's over 2,000 years of history and it's all documented. Can you imagine and understand the level of pride and understanding that a people can reach once they've studied and uncovered? And yes, we could say that there's a certain type of history by whom it's written, but I do look at it juxtaposed to people of African descent, for example, people of indigenous backgrounds, people who are on the margins, whose history oftentimes haven't been prioritized, documented. So what is lost once that history has not been heeded or questioned or thought or digested by a group of people, and we assimilate the histories of others, and we don't necessarily perceive ourselves in the same light as we understand the future. So I do feel that is something that I dream of history's understanding, is particularly from Haitian history, from where I come from, and the legacies of Black people who have fought against the French, who believed in freedom, who believed that they could see the future where chains were broken, and hearts were moving and beating and singing, and ideas were flourishing, and societies were free in ways that they never even understood, but they felt it. I think that type of history has been very much left in the corridors of time and space. So in order for us to fully comprehend how the future can fully manifest inside of us, there is a necessity to understand it, to teach it, to break it down and understand all the parts that compromises of its values. I think the easiest way to reach a post-humanist vision is to think about the animal, the species that's behind me, who lived hundreds of millions of years ago. That is absolutely the most mind-blowing thing ever. Hundreds of millions of years ago. We weren't even a thought. Humans were created even at that point through evolution, or it's very surreal to think about when you juxtapose this deep time in front of us in our human societies. I think it was said that if you put human civilization in the grand scale of the universe, from the 14 billions of years into a 360-year calendar, 360-day calendar, human civilizations have only existed for the last second. And December 31st, at 11:59 p.m. I'm here at the St. Paul Cathedral, the structure that stands at the foundation of the Christian church. There's been worship here for about 1,400 years. I just sat for a little bit of the Mass and really took time to slow down in this moment, in this travel, in this journey. Because I always feel that God always works in mysterious ways, and my faith and my belief in the higher powers has ever been so stronger. I think the future is deeply, deeply defined by a higher power. As many times people might want to deny this, I am a believer, and growing up in Haiti, I was an altar boy. I was someone who deeply believed in the higher world, but I think it came to a point where I really needed to formulate a form of decolonizing vision, especially when I moved to the US, because I would look all around the steps and the frameworks of the angels and the prophets were all white. And I would wonder time and time again, where would a God that looks like me? I think I had to go through my own process of peering across history, deepening my relationship with different philosophies, different religion, from Buddhism, from Hinduism, from Islam, from African indigenous traditions. I think there is a thread that connects a lot of these sacred practices that humans have uncovered in their own might. I think when one starts to see the patterns and the flows of all these different religions and practices, you start to unravel the golden thread that defines the God. I think for me, growing up Catholic, it is sort of my mythology of how I connect best to the higher realms. Despite the damages, I think I had to uncover something for me. I had to decolonize the Catholic Church. And I think religion is going to play a pivotal role in the future. I think so much harm and wrong have been made in the name of God. But I do believe if someone really finds that space in the inner reaches of their souls, we can start to believe in our own powers. We can start to believe in something better can happen. We can find hope. We can find imagination. We can find purpose. We can find vision. Profound divine vision that can inspire us to build a better world. That can help us see that we're not alone on this planet. There is a grand design of nature and the universe. There's something that ties us together. Something that we're so disconnected to. Something magical, full of beauty. I think the future is something that can be held once we have faith. And once we start to tap into this force, this universal force that we all have access to as humans, as beings made from nature, as beings made in this entire ecosystem of our planet. As this journey ends, I think my time in London has really shown me the power in being an optimist. I think I'm filled with optimism that the best of the future is yet to come. I think a lot of our challenges that we face as a collective species is but opportunities for us to come together, to embrace new ideas, to see things in a new light. I'm here standing in Buckingham Palace, the central force that represents the royal crown in the UK. And I feel that for me, as an individual, as a Black writer and painter and futurist, I feel like that we have a responsibility. And I don't think this responsibility is crushing me, or in terms, it's invigorating me. It is telling me that the best is yet to come. Despite the challenges and the revolutions of technology and the crisis of imagination we are facing right now as a planet, I think all of this brings about for me a deeper purpose of why I'm here. A deeper purpose that things can change. Change is the only constant, and things can evolve. And it requires that we bring a form of internationalism that embraces different types of cultures and perspectives and ideas that we haven't seen before. Something that doesn't erase, something that is creative, something that is soulful, something that is beautiful. I think the future is something a lot of people often don't see in a positive light. But I want to challenge you. The future is not somewhere ephemeral. The future is you. It's in your day-to-day action. It's in how you choose to see the world more positively, how you choose to engage your mental health, your wellness, how you choose to be open to new ideas that you previously weren't open to. I think the future is something for the taking, but I do believe it can only manifest if we have a deep enthusiasm and optimism, that we are hopeful, that we're brought to life by the things that we care deeply about. That's what the future is, and that's where I believe it manifests.